Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's We Create Space webinar, How to Shape Inclusive Family Leave Policies, LGBTQ plus parenting and caregiving. We have a fantastic panel today who are joining us, and you can see them on screen and you'll be meeting them shortly. For those that aren't familiar with me, my name is Neil Hudson-Basing. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the events manager for We Create Space, and I will be your moderator, host for this afternoon. Please do feel free to use the chat box throughout today's session. Firstly, please feel free to start off by introducing yourself. We'd love to know who's joining us this afternoon. In the absence of seeing you face to face, it's wonderful to know who our audience are. Please let us know who you are, your pronouns, what you do, where you're joining us from, and get the conversation going. Share your thoughts and experiences, and we've factored in lots of time for questions throughout, so you can pop those in the Q&A box. I'm going to take you through a little bit of this afternoon. So we have got the next hour together. We'll start with an opening poll shortly, and we'll then have an in-conversation with our guest speakers. For this afternoon, we'll have some Q&As, and then we'll ask everyone to leave us their practical takeaways. And what takeaways are you leaving today's session with? So just a little bit about We Create Space. We are a global learning platform providing DEI consultancy to organizations. We are a community interest company and a collective of change makers. We've got about 300 plus LGBTQ plus change makers as part of our collective, and we work with organizations to make them more inclusive workplaces. And what does that look like? Well, I'll take you through that now. So firstly, not only do we work with our clients, but we are also serve our community, and the money that we make goes back into organizing community events like this one, webinars, in-person activities, and we want to bring people together to learn, connect, and grow. That's very much the ethos of what We Create Space is all about. We provide effective solutions for culture change and growth. 86% of our clients said our bespoke solutions were extremely helpful in supporting their DEI objectives, and 95% of clients said they would recommend We Create Space. So go us. How do we do this? Well, we do this in a number of ways. Firstly, with workshops and webinars like the ones today, through live conversations and panel discussions as well, really bringing lots of people with different lived experiences together, looking at challenges and barriers, and also our commonalities. We work on leadership development programs and retreats, and all of our work is centered around bespoke content, partnerships, and we also dabble in consultancy and research as well. So there's a lot that we do. So if you think we can support you, then please do feel free to get in touch. It is Pride season. We'd love to work with you. So yeah, reach out. If you've got any questions, please pop them in the chat box, and myself or my colleague John Paul, who's on the call today, will be able to answer those for you. We have recently launched our new online platform, which is called Campus. There you can find members of the We Create Space community, our collective. There are different kind of geographical groups on there, and it's a great place to learn. Again, come together, learn, connect, and grow. And I'm just going to play you a short video just to take you through a little bit of what Campus is all about. There you go. So that's a little bit more about campus. Please do click on the link that I've just said in the chat box for more information, and we would absolutely love you to join us over there. So I have an opening poll that I'd like to share with you, and I'm just about to bring that up on the screen just now. Bear with me. So where's my poll? There it is. Okay, so I have a few questions that I'd love to hear from you. So firstly, what brings you here today? Um, I want to improve my organization's family leave policies. I'm an LGBTQ plus parent or caregiver wanting to empower myself. I want to be a more supportive manager or colleague, or curiosity. Our second question, do you feel your organization's family leave policies are inclusive for LGBTQ plus families and caregivers and other minorities? So yes, absolutely. Yes, somewhat. Not in my opinion, or I'm unsure. And then finally, our third question, what do you think are the biggest barriers when it comes to shaping inclusive family leave policies? Is it lack of awareness and education? Is it lack of representation and co-production at decision-making level? Is it the fear of getting it wrong? Or is there just simply not enough importance placed on this topic? So we'll give you a second or two just to vote in that, and then I'll just share the results with you. Thank you for taking part. Thank you for being here today. If you have any questions at all about We Create Space and the topic today, please do share those in the chat box or the Q&A box, and also share your thoughts and experiences on this if you're comfortable doing so. So I'm just going to end the poll there. Okay, so in terms of what brings you here today, we have a mix of wanting to improve my organization's family leave policies and people who are LGBTQ plus parents or caregivers. Okay, most of you feel that your organization's family leave policies are inclusive, at least somewhat. And what are the biggest barriers? Well, most of you believe that it's lack of awareness and education. So thank you so much for taking part in that. I'd like to invite my panel to join us on the screen. We are delighted to be welcomed to be joined by some brilliant guests today. Hi, everyone. How are you all doing?
Hi, Neil. Fantastic.
Yeah,
Welcome.
good.
Welcome,
Good,
Jack,
thanks.
Josephine. All good?
Yeah, good, thanks.
Fantastic. Well, let's start with some introductions. Are you happy to introduce yourselves, share your pronouns, a little bit about what you do professionally, and your work and your feelings in relation to today's topic, particularly kind of like what your family setups are? And then Raga will come to you first.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Neil. I'm Raga De Silva. My pronouns are she, her. I'm originally from Mumbai, India. I've lived in New Zealand for many, many years, and now I live here in the UK for the last 12 years. I travel globally quite a bit. I've done a lot of work in about 14 other geographies apart from the ones I mentioned. I was once married to a man. From that marriage, I have twins who are now 26 years old. However, many years ago, which is now going back 17 years, I later got involved with a woman who I am now married to. So my wife and I raised our twins together for the last 17 years. So I'm very interested in the worldview of how people look at our relationship and our family, because we are quite different. And I'm also interested in this particular topic, Neil. So thanks to We Create Space for giving us this space, because I have actually, over the last 20 years, seen changes happen from absolutely being completely ignored to at least now not being ignored, at least being looked at. So thank you.
Oh, well, thank you so much for being here. And Josephine, I'm going to come over to you because your children are also grown up.
They are, yes, they are. So I've got three children, and they're in their sort of ranging from their mid to late 20s. One's 30. I can't believe that I've got children who are that old, but there you go. So I'm Josephine, and my pronouns are she, her. And the reason I'm here is that two of my children came out as trans back in 2015, I think it was now. So they're doing really well. And, suddenly we went from, that saying about we're a nice normal family. And actually I discovered that, but our children are actually a little bit different, which is fantastic. And it's, it's been an amazing discovery to find out who they really are. So that's the reason why I'm here, because what I've done is I try and support other parents whose kids are coming out as transgender, because it's often at the moment something that we don't necessarily expect. And I think particularly for parents of my age, who've led quite sheltered lives, shall I say, it was a bit of a surprise. And, you know, really, I think the most important thing is to accept our kids for who they are. And, you know, that's why I'm here, really, to support other parents who maybe have had this happen in their family, and, you know, really encourage them and help them to navigate this big change in their lives.
Fantastic, and definitely an experience that people might not necessarily link straight away with what a family leave policy looks like. So fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. And Jack.
Hi, thanks, Neil. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jack Lopez. I am an academic, a medical anthropologist up in the north of England, in Yorkshire. I'm also an EDI consultant and a trainer and a researcher and lots of many other things, because I do what I can to pay the bills. There we go there. My pronouns are he, him, and I am the father of 4 children. I am right at the coalface of parenting, I suppose, compared to our other two panelists today. So my eldest child is 16, and then the next one is 14, and then the next one is 11, and the last one after that is 10. So quite a collection of ages there. We're rapidly moving into adolescence, which is quite a challenge for me. I am a lone parent, so I bring my children up on my own. I am also a gay trans man, so I have also transitioned as a parent as well, and have the lived experience of starting off my parental journey in a marriage and being perceived as female, and then as the process has gone on, I've transitioned from not being married to being a man, and still being a parent throughout the whole thing, but have a really interesting life experience within the workplace, particularly of very early on in my career being seen as a mother, and now I am a father. Not only that, I'm a lone father and a gay father, and even though I've not changed inside as who I am, the way that the world perceives me and the way that the world treats me as a gay dad is very different to how I started off. So yeah, I have lots of things to say about the perceptions of family in the workplace, definitely.
Fantastic. Well, you all bring so many different kind of experiences from identities, whether that's, you know, different identities for yourselves and children. And actually, so within your different experiences, what does an inclusive family leave policy look like to each of you? And we'll jump back in the same order that we went in. So Raga, over to you.
Gosh, Neil, I almost thought you said straight order. So
yeah, that's definitely a slip there. No straight here.
You know, I think first we have to, before we go there, Neil, I think we have to acknowledge that the family structure has changed. I mean, there was a traditional family structure that actually I was conditioned into, and that's why I got married to a man at a very young age. And that was about that you're married to a man, a woman is married to a biological man, and a biological woman. In fact, the government of India last year, when we were fighting for marriage equality, had headlines, and they said that, sorry, we can't allow this to happen because marriage is only between a biological man and a biological woman. And we're talking about April 2023. So first we have to acknowledge that that is the conditioning, that we think that's a traditional marriage setup, and therefore that is a family, man, woman, 1 child, 2 children, and that's it. Biologically, you know, you've had them biologically. That has changed. Over time, of course, earlier there was adoption, there was surrogacy that was still allowed. And now look at a family structure. All of us, I mean, when I look out, I don't even think about a single person being a parent. It doesn't even bother me. But I know a lot of my friends, and I'm saying friends because people I know will say, I mean, what's happening? This has become so abnormal. This is so, I don't like it. I like the old structure. What have you done, Raga, to this world? But thanks to you, people like you. And they say things like, you people have done this to us. Now, suddenly in my workplace, I have problems because you are getting more attention. You people are getting more opportunities and benefits than we straight people get. So that kind of conversations are now happening. You know, I don't mind, because I think it's good and healthy to have some debate and conversations and discussions. because at least people are listening. So for me, a really good, sorry I'm taking this long, but a very good policy would be that everybody is inclusive, not just the LGBTQ community, but also the non, because those are the people who need to include us. They don't understand. When you have family days, include families, all kinds of families. Don't please write Mr. and Mrs. or spouse, partners, or whatever people are familiar, comfortable with. Give equal opportunities, equal, policies, benefits to whether you are a single parent, whether you are a parent who has adopted, whether you are, in a same-sex relationship, whether you are in a, different gender relationship, it doesn't matter. It should be equal for everyone. So to me, if I was now working, because when I worked in New Zealand, I was a single parent with little twins at that time. Oh my God, it was so difficult for me. Every time I came back home after 2 days because the kids were unwell, they would have comments like, oh, how was the weather wherever you were? Oh, you look a little tan today. Did you have a good time? So they would just assume that you're out holidaying with your children because the organization was not helping either support us. Yeah, so I mean, I'll let someone else speak now.
Oh, thank you for sharing, and absolutely. Just because an LGBTQ plus family gets the recognition that they deserve, that doesn't detract from anything and anyone else, and nor should it. And everyone should be on the same level when it comes to their family being given equality. Josephine, how about yourself? What does it feel like to you, having also had twins?
Oh no, I haven't had twins, fortunately.
Oh, I thought that.
No, I haven't got twins. I think I could have coped.
Oh.
But no, the thing I'm thinking about, Neil, is that I'm sort of thinking about it from the family perspective. So the families of people who are transgender, and I think what's often not recognised is that you're navigating this huge change in your family life, and it's not, although it's a very personal matter and it might not even be you that's transitioning, nevertheless, you're still quite affected by it. So not only, I think if you're a parent, you might need extra leave to, say, support your family through appointments, that sort of thing. I think as well, it's really helpful to recognise that actually the person whose family member is going through this might need extra support and might need some time off and might need more sort of mental health support, and might need time off for that sort of purposes as well. Because certainly from speaking to the people who I speak to on my podcast, I know that it can be quite a big thing to be handling. And so I think for organisations to be inclusive, it's quite often recognising that there might be extra needs that families have got, and that by supporting your employee, ultimately that's really going to help them and help them to be more productive if they can have some time off so that they can come back to work and really focus on work. So that would be what I'd offer.
Fantastic, thank you. What's the name of your podcast?
It's Gloriously Unready,
yeah.
And it's for parents of transgender young people.
Fantastic. And where can people find it?
Oh, and any of the podcast apps.
Any of the podcast. Thank you.
Yeah.
Definitely a plug there. Jack,
Yeah.
how about yourself? What does an inclusive family leave policy look like to you, particularly as you have younger children right now?
Yeah, I think it's, I echo what everybody else has said before me, and what it's made me think of while I'm listening to these kind of different situations as well is, for me, as somebody in my day job that is very much involved in producing and writing policy, because I have a senior management role in the university, it's also about the process. So it's not just about revising your policy so that it is queer friendly, so that pregnancy and the what was traditionally a maternity policy suddenly becomes more gender neutral or more inclusive of men that give birth and so forth, or thinking about your language. It's changing the policy, but actually part of that process as well is engaging with stakeholders when you're developing that policy. So you're not just somebody sat in HR writing the policy, it goes into the system and nobody even notices. family-friendly policies, LGBTQ-friendly policies need to be part of workforce education as well. So it's about when you're creating, rewriting, revising your policy, you bring stakeholders in to that revision. You speak to queer and non-queer staff about how they'd like to see the policy and what they want included in it, because you need to have your workers buying in to a policy to be able to apply it properly, but also have a relaunch of those policies that come along with training and discussion in the workplace. Educate people when you're starting to bring new language in that is about inclusivity, that is about diversity. You have to understand, you know, depending where you work, that not all your workforce are going to be completely literate on what inclusive language means, and it might cause problems. So you shouldn't have a policy without having a training package attached to it and having those conversations with your workforce and bringing you along there, so people don't always feel that change is imposed on them and that everybody feels part of the process, because what you're doing then is you're opening up spaces for conversation for colleagues to be able to talk about their family life. And what you do within that is we start to see lots of similarities. You know, the specific things that I love about my family and me as a dad that make me special, but there's also so much about me that is so run of the mill, everyday parenting, family stuff, that the stuff that impacts me impacts on a lot of families, whether they're queer or not anyway. And by including people, employees within the process of policy development, then you automatically, naturally, those conversations will happen, and people within a workforce will start to relate to each other and see that families, we all suffer from the same things. You know, my children are far too addicted to tablets. You know, I need time off when they're sick. Other people do that as well. You know, there's my work hours need to go around the school days sometimes, or I need to think about the school holidays. All of these things are things that we share regardless of whether we're LGBTQ families or not.
I think so many of the conversations in this space often reveal, you know, yes, we have our differences, we have our core differences, but we actually all share so many commonalities. And you hear, like you've just explained, that's something that many of these challenges as people, things that all parents experience, but we just kind of tend to focus on the automatic, easily identifiable differences. What do you, let's stay on this subject, because actually when it comes to these conversations, that we're facing a difficult time when it comes to education and awareness training. Why do you think that people are switching off to these conversations? What do you think are some of the barriers when it comes to education around LGBTQ plus parenting and caregiving? And we'll stay with you, Jack, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think stuff gets institutionalized very quickly, and I think things get politicized when they don't have to be. I think we've got very large organizations, particularly institutions and public institutions I can speak from, have got very lazy very quickly in turning training and education into a tick box exercise. It's a very passive computer exercise where you begin a job, you'll be put on an induction program, you'll be asked to complete a faceless training course on a computer, and it's not right. And I think that's why I think it's the tools as the reason as to why people are switching off. I think some of it is because also it's a sign that diversity is becoming more the norm. So people are questioning, well, I already know this. Why do I need to, why do we need to have this conversation? I already know about this. And I think a lot of it is about thinking about how we do this, how we have training, like we deliver at We Create Space, we work from a point of view of lived experience, we have conversations, we make people think about themselves. There's more to training, taking on knowledge and applying it than sitting in front of a computer screen and ticking some boxes. It's actually the one thing that brings people together and brings understanding in a workplace is ultimately human connection and finding ways within which you can relate to people regardless of how different you initially might think you are.
Yeah, a lot of, it comes back to power of storytelling and conversations and connecting. Raga, is this something that you've experienced as well as someone that works in this area too?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest barrier, at least from my point of view, because I'm going to focus on a certain community, which is South Asians, for instance. There is a certain perception about our culture. Culturally, we are different. We come from families where we have different gods. In the morning, we pray to our different gods. Hindus pray to different god, Catholics, and then Muslims. So we have our own little, within the Hindu families, there are hundreds of different idols that we worship in the morning. Our homes are very different. Our homes, our parents typically are homophobic, or they don't want to know about you people and that world. And, so we're completely separated. And then we go into workplaces where we have to be this perfect person. We have to be really, open to different things. And it's almost like we live two different lives. So when you live two different lives, somewhere you have to make sure that there is a bridge between two different lives. And that bridge comes from what Jack said about is training, making sure, and also making sure that it doesn't feel like it is imposed upon you. Right? So that again is very important, because a lot of people I know have these conversations outside their little training room, say that, gosh, yet another DEI exercise, yet another thing I have to go through, yet another thing that I have to now live with, So things like that. So it is about they and them. And I feel that from our cultural point of view, religion plays a really big role in our life. And somehow we have to bridge that gap. I found in my experience barriers such as not only this conversation that people have to your face and behind your back, but they actually make effort to send you an email. I have received a couple of emails in the past, actually, where when I went to India and I talked about, these kind of, we should have equality and the kinds of equality we talked. I'm working, in fact, with an organization in India that is talking about, that's actually open, let's say, to talking about having equal, leave for the LGBT. And they say, this particular client is very interesting, because 6 months ago they said, oh, we don't have that problem here. That is not part of our community. I don't have a single trans person. I don't have a single lesbian. Da, da, da. And then I said, are you sure? Because people don't always come out. And people don't come out maybe because you have to think within, why do you not have lesbians and gay men and people coming out? Because maybe you're not making them feel safe. And they took that on board. And then they had these training programs with people that I kind of identified, and they trained. And then they came back 3 months ago and they said, you know what, you were right. We actually now have a few of you people. I'm sorry I'm using this because I get this told a lot in India. So these you people, they identified, and then they started doing programs and policies. And now, like, for instance, I told them, when two women are together, when two women same-sex relationship, do you know we have menopausal issues at the same time? We go through menopause at the same time, often. Do you have anything in place for something like that? And they'd never thought about it. I said, when children get ill, whether they're from queer or non-queer families, children will, like I said, if you have twins, in my case, I have two children, you have one person has chicken pox, the other child will also get chicken pox. Do you have that in place for your... So they have started thinking about it. The barriers are not from outside. The barriers are from within here. Until they change this and then find people like Jack, like Josephine, myself, who know how to structure a program, then make sure that everybody within the business understands that you have all the key stakeholders buy into the program. And then you basically have a collective conversation. You can't not have conversations, coffee table conversations in workplaces. I'm telling you an example. This is now 10 years ago. I walked into my office in New Zealand. This happened actually 4 years ago in India as well. Same conversation, people chatting away. They've somehow heard that this woman, Indian woman, is actually gay. And the same thing, the story broke out in India in BBC 4 years ago through my book. Again, the same thing, people chatting away. And as soon as you walk there, they stop. They pretend that they were, the whispers stop. They pretend they talk about something else. To me, that shows that we have to train people, that we have to make sure that people understand it's not you and us and they and them. We're all in this together. It's all, we are part of this ecosystem, and we have to support each other, which means that if I have to take leave for my child, just like a non-queer person has to take leave for their child, it is okay. We're not doing something else. I'm not going and meeting my wife or girlfriend instead of taking my child. I'm actually at the doctor's, So that trust, and that will come only with normalizing it and working together within the organization. Stakeholders, employees all work together to create a culture of acceptability and change.
Absolutely. And psychological safety is a massive part of that. It's like this conversation's gone full circle. We started with education, and now to get to that, to get from education to psychological safety and back to education. So just a bit of a two-pronged question there then for you all. What should organizations be doing to educate themselves on some of the issues that LGBTQ families face, but also wider, in order to create more inclusive, intersectional, meaningful policies? But then on the flip side of that, what should organizations be doing to actually make sure that they're in line with LGBTQ rights as well? Because, you know, both of those things, so you got the inclusive workplace, which is that sense of belonging and psychological safety, but then you've also got the legal obligations as well. So you've already mentioned education and training programs. What are some of the other things that they can be doing?
Sorry, shall I take this? Shall I just very quickly say? So I
Yeah.
just give a basic here. Actually, it's pretty basic in terms of just like I said, conversations. Like, you know what we create spaces doing, for instance, having these conversations. They're simple. People will listen to things. You know, earlier days when I was growing up, or even until what 2007, we didn't have Google, so you didn't have information, access to information. You had to go to a library. And really, I can tell you, and I've shared this story many times. I went to a library in Mumbai looking for the word lesbian. I said, oh, there must be some book there somewhere so I can actually find out what does a lesbian mean, because I didn't have access to other information. First of all, I couldn't ask the librarian because I was too scared to ask the librarian. I went looking whatever, I couldn't find the information. So we can't now say that we don't have information. We have access to information. Information is available. So first look for information, find experts. There are experts, people who know their stuff, people who are aware, people who help organizations put policies in place. There is expertise available. And I think most of all, we have to remember that there is a human element to this. Policies they're not a book that you have to put aside and then never refer to it again. Talk to people. We are all available. We are human. And I think this is where people forget. And in terms of making sure that we follow a legal standard, see, these days companies are global, multinational companies. No longer can a company in India say, I'm sorry, I'm independent. I don't know what's happening in your world, which is in the UK, you Firans. You can't say that. You're working in a global environment. Information and policies can be adapted locally. You have to access them. You have to provide it to them. I know a corporation in the US that for many, many years refused to give their policy on LGBT to their company in India, refused. And why? Because they said, oh, in India, they will not adopt it. I will get into legal trouble. I said, no, that is not your responsibility. Your responsibility is to hand over that policy to India and start a dialogue, start a discussion. It is the Indian leaders there who will then make sure that it is within the legal framework of that country. But we have to learn. We can't hold back information and not allow information to flow and not make assumptions.
Yep. Thank you. We'll come on to assumptions definitely shortly. Jack?
Yeah, I think, you know, just off the back of what Raga was saying there, I work in a higher education institution that we have lots of international partners, and we work with countries that sometimes are assumed from the outside, or they do have legal frameworks that make it illegal to be LGBTQI and so forth. And, you know, this is touching on broader DEI practice anyway as well. There's arguments I've had in the workplace around, well, that, you know, our specific country partner have asked us to do some DEI work with them, but they only want to speak about women's empowerment. We will not talk about LGBTQ stuff because that's not what we do here. And I have had to work with leaders within my organisation in terms of explaining to them that actually you're there to have a business partnership. You have to be confident to say, no, these are the values of our institution. These are the values of who we are as a business. This is what we have to do to work with you. It will fit your legal framework, as Rag was saying, but you don't start cookie cutting in order to have these different partnerships outside the business as well. But for me, it also is about, it brings about larger, broader questions in terms of, if you're having to educate yourself, that tells me that there's not enough representation within the higher levels of your organisation to the fact that you don't know about this. And the broader DEI message is, you need to be readdressing who gets to make decisions in your business and your company, and asking those questions. Why are you sat in rooms asking questions about a population you know nothing about? That says that nobody from that population is represented amongst your decision makers. And actually, yes, you need to do your homework. Yes, you need to think about it more, but you also need to look inwards in terms of the company, because you should have that diversity within the room of decision makers as well. So it doesn't become something you have to intentionally go out and seek and think about, because you've got those people in the room already. Once you bring those voices into the room, then it's automatic that, well, people will say, well, what about me? Well, what about my family? Well, what about, my people? Well, what about, it happens when you've got those voices in the room. So it's not just about organisations educating themselves, it's about organisations putting a mirror up to themselves as well and asking who holds power.
And I guess that trickles onto so many different things, doesn't it? Not just inclusive family leave policies, but also recruitment, staff bodies, how the organization runs, diversity, also diversity of thought, and therefore productivity and success, and so many important things to come to that. Josephine, what are some of the things that you hear in relation to kind of like the legal obligation side of things when talking to some of the parents that you support?
Yeah, I sort of I just wanted to add to the conversation actually around the sort of inclusivity within the workplace. My husband works for a major sort of US corporate bank, and his experience on joining of them, their training being inclusive, of having a transgender man who came on and did some training for them, of running affinity groups for people who are sort of involved with LGBTQ, either themselves or family members, just how completely supportive that was of him. And I think, the point I'd like to make about that is that if you're hiding yourself at work, if you're hiding something about yourself or about your family, that adds to your cognitive load. And that means that you're not as able to participate free of that prejudice that you're having to deal with. And so I think from a sort of company perspective, if you want to make the most of your employees, actually to have this inclusivity is so, so important, because, it makes it so much easier. My daughter, she's a computer person. And, which company did she choose when she was faced with a whole lot of choices to make? And she chose the one with the best LGBTQ policy. So it really does, I think, pay off for people to actually have this inclusivity. And even for a selfish reason, it makes people more profitable, I think. It makes companies more profitable to be inclusive to all their employees. And the other thing I'd like to add is that often, like Raghu said, you don't know. And it might be, that someone is LGBTQ, or it might be that they've got an LGBTQ relation and you don't know. And my husband said, for him, even sort of hesitating to actually, in a sense, come out with his work colleagues when people say, how are the family? And to suddenly, having, how are the boys? Well, actually, no, we've only got one boy now. We had three, but we haven't. We've actually got two girls. So that sort of thing, I think, for people to think about that is actually really helpful, and that's much more at the sort of, I suppose, the individual level than the sort of company level. But it's just sort of interesting, I think, to think about that. And obviously, in terms of the legal situation for myself and my husband, in the UK, transgender people are protected by the Equality Act, as are their families. So, my husband in his corporate environment does have those protections as well. And I certainly sort of found that when I've talked to people, there's one particular interview I've done with someone who was a wife of a transgender woman, and talking about a bit what Raghu was saying about people, when she walked into the room would go quiet, and it was obvious that people were talking about her. And she said the microaggressions that she experienced at work, people joking, just making silly quips. And actually, when she was going through something that was, you know, a real sort of change of life for her, and trying to work out, you know, where the relationship and everything was going, to have that sort of atmosphere at work was really difficult. So I think it's really important to pay attention to those aspects, certainly in the UK, of equality law.
Neil, can I add to this? This is like really interesting, because I also want to remind ourselves that when we talk about organizations, what are the kind of organizations are we talking about? We forget that there are organizations like the police, for instance, and I'm going to take you back into the prison. There's an organization as well. They have a very different outlook to life. The kind of programs and sensitization that they go through is quite different. And when I think about this similar, because like I said, I'm on various signposting groups in India, and the transgender community faces a lot of issues in India. And I can tell you, like in the prison, in the police, when a trans person gets stopped on the road for whatever reason. There's a recent case just last week, and I'm sorry, trigger warning for those, this is disturbing to hear, that they're stripped down, and then they're asked to show that they are trans, and they have to prove that they are. And that is also an organization. If you look at it, police is all an organization. So when you have that level of organizational barriers that they haven't even started acknowledging LGBT and the LGBT problems we have. There is law, there is Equality Act, everything, but is that implemented? It isn't. So where do we even start? So that is why when I do work within the Indian framework, whether it is in India or outside of India, I find the starting point is zero, sometimes even minus, because they don't even acknowledge, like I said initially, that LGBTQ people exist. We don't exist. They have to look for them, and they have to think, oh, maybe they do. If they do, then they're not part of my problem. They're somebody else's problem. I don't want them. There is no protection for them. So which means that they can then be asked to leave. There is no champion sitting there in organizations like we have here. And sometimes I also think that we must acknowledge that we need to be grateful, because the UK has, thanks to the Equality Act 2010, I think, and a whole lot of policies that we have in place, we are protected. And that's we have to be grateful for that, because in a lot of countries we don't have that protection either. But countries like India and other countries which are just kind of working their DNI strategies now, they need to learn from countries like the UK. And sorry, and that is why I thought that was such a wonderful point you made, Josephine.
Thank you for sharing, and absolutely, definitely, it's really important that we are grateful and that we acknowledge that, and we take that into our learning. You know, when it comes to working in global organisations and how we bring people along on the journey, in terms of kind of sensitive language and cultural sensitivity, and such. I'd like to just, oh, sorry, Jack.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that as well, because I'm aware that, you know, a lot of the time when we have these conversations as well, we talk a lot about institutions, we talk a lot about very professionalized workplaces. And I think we need to broaden the conversations to the everyday working experience, and particularly of working class people as well, because these are, you know, this is beyond, we need a whole course of webinars, I think, to think about this. But, you know, it's very different to think about the structure within the NHS, within higher education, within the banking sector, within the professional sector, than somebody that works in a factory, you know, somebody who is a carpenter, somebody that, you know, works in a supermarket. There's just, there's very different challenges there, and some of what I'm thinking about when I'm listening to this conversation as well is actually, it's really important. You know, we talk about bringing yourself to work, about workplaces being inclusive and so forth, but we also need to think about the leaders within organizations need to think about, what about those people that don't want to, that choose not to come out at work? There still needs to be protection in place for those people. There still needs to be somebody within that business or organisation who can know that they are a trans person or a queer person, so that they know the extra pressure that somebody might go through having to choosing to hide part of themselves in the workplace because of safety, because they don't want to, because where they work is not at a point, you know, where it's safe for them to come out. That doesn't mean there shouldn't be a policy and an understanding and a space for them within that workplace as well. And I think that's something that's missing from a lot of these conversations we have about LGBTQ inclusivity in the workplace. I think we often target them at a very professional arena, and we forget about everyday working class professions and spaces where it really is not so easy.
Well, I mean, I guess in those environments, you haven't got DEI experts. You've not got these kind of training sessions that cover LGBTQ parenting and caregiving.
Yeah.
I think some of this does feed into biases and stereotypes. You know, we've talked a lot about safety. What are some of the ways that these problems might manifest in the workplace and therefore impact the development of education, but also family leave policies?
I think for me, speaking as a single dad, speaking as a gay dad, there are so many assumptions made about a man on his own with children, you know, because not in all spaces I'm very open about my sexuality in the workplace. I'm not always open about my gender identity in the workplace. So for all intents and purposes, lots of the people that I come into contact with in the workplace understand me as a gay man on his own with children. And this is about going back to the language that we use in policies as well, and the assumption, you know, that there is always a woman, there's always a mother, you know, or in cases where there are two women partners, that, you know, people want to, it's about educating people to let to know that it's intrusive to ask where the missing parent is, or the assumptions, you know, that my children are somehow missing out because there isn't a maternal figure. And I think these stereotypes and these assumptions are reinforced in documents and in policy, in the wording that's used, in the way within which, if an organisation is having a family day and it's asking people to talk about their families, and this goes back to the training and education of workforces as well, to just not be making assumptions about families. You know, my children know who I am, they're not confused. You know, the rest of the world might be confused looking at my family, but my family, we're all very clear about who we are and what our daily normality is. And it's very, very, very difficult. I think also it's about normalizing new parents and younger parents. And understanding that your queer colleagues always have to have a moment to think about whether they're going to have to out themselves. This whole process of coming out all the time. I had a period in my life where my body has produced children. I've given birth, but people will look at me and they will see a man. And so I'm having to censor myself all the time when I'm talking about where my children come from, because I'm having to assess the safety of whether or not it's okay for me to expose the fact that I gave birth to my children, because that instantly invites people to ask questions about my body that are very, very personal that I don't want to answer. And so it's, yeah, a lot of it is around, for me, the representation of how we start to have everyday conversations, and the way that language is reflected in policies and documents within the organisation, and even conversations with staff and so forth.
Thank you. Josephine, is it all right to come over to yourself next?
I was thoroughly nodding to all that Jack had to say there, because I think, you know, there's just so many assumptions that people make. And the problem is that I think you just sort of assume everybody's like you. And if you're in the majority, you just sort of make that assumption that everyone's like you. And I think, you know, going right back to that first question that you asked about, you know, why do we sort of have this resistance in a sense to it? And I think that's part of it, is just that assumption that, you know, everybody's just like me. And why do we have to make these allowances for people without realizing that actually, you know, within our community, there's so much variety and diversity, and it's just not necessarily safe for people to come out to us. You know, I just think it's so important that we we do hear people like Jack, you know, sort of tell their stories. But obviously, you know, Jack's being honest and open about his story, but often that isn't the case. People can't be honest. They can't talk about this sort of stuff because actually, especially if you're transgender, at the moment, there's just so much hate directed at you. You know, and it makes it very difficult to actually, for people just to know about it and for it to be normal. And I'm always struck by people who say, you know, you don't necessarily know how many transgender people that you actually know. Just don't know. You make these assumptions about people you don't know. You know, and yeah, I was going to think the other thing I was just sort of thinking about as well, and I don't know why it sort of came to mind, but I think it was in answer to your question, was just sort of, it's you know, it's about making things easy for people. You know, when my daughter started at her first professional work, they hadn't had anybody who was transgender before, and they did try and accommodate her, but it was things like, you know, making separate arrangements for her as opposed to just including her with all the other arrangements, and you know, not necessarily thinking through some of the things that she might be experiencing. And I think that's again why it's so important what Jack said about listening to people who can represent that viewpoint.
Yeah, co-production and collaboration is certainly key. We actually had a question in the chat box. Do you think LGBTQ people are good at representing the whole community? You know, or one lesbian can speak about all lesbians. And I think you know, the answer to that is, whilst we do share some commonalities, everyone needs to be heard. Raga, before we move on to the final question, I'll come over to you on that one.
On this comment?
Oh, no, on the previous question about kind of stereotypes and biases, but feel free to.
Sure. You know, can I tell you, this is one of the reasons I actually decided to give up my job. I decided not to work. I was fed up of the microaggressions. Almost every day I would be, I don't know, it was deliberate, intentional. I don't know whether they thought it was funny, but I would be asked, oh, so how are your children today? What did they do? And then as mothers, or parents, we just talk about things that happen with your family. And in my case, it would be, see, if my son did anything wrong, and I would talk about it, and they would say, see, I told you, your children don't have a father. They need a father. And this, just wait and watch. He's only 14 now. Just wait and watch what's going to happen to him when he grows older. And it was always that constant blame game put on you, the pressure put on you. So there is a lot of stereotype anyway. I mean, like I said, if you took a day off, it was as if you were going out like for a party, instead of that you were actually seriously looking out for your children. And it's quite tough for you as a parent to do. Or as Jack mentioned, when you're in a same-sex relationship, the typical response that you get from the organization, if they know about it, is, oh, why do you have to take the time off every time? Tell your partner to do it. She's also a woman. So obviously that's what we're supposed to do all our lives, right? As women, just look after our children. So those kind of microaggressions finally got me to a point. I said, you know what? I don't care anymore. I am going to create a business, and I'm going to create a business that actually incorporates all the problems I have in other businesses. So when I set up my speaking agency in India, we had 65 people. It's a very small business, but I made sure that people were very inclusive. It was like rare in India for a small organization to have conversations like the kind of conversations we were having, the kind of events we would run at our offices. If somebody came out to us, we would celebrate it together. We would ask for permission and consent, of course, and we say we'd celebrate. It's our coming out day. You know, things like that we did. In fact, that came out of, I came out at my business 4 years ago, and that came out from there. And also, sadly, it came out on the back of a very young person in our organization who was, I don't know what is the word, mocked, treated so poorly that I'm sorry, I'm going to use the word, they killed themselves. And we had no idea. I had no idea that that person was actually gay. We had no idea. But obviously someone got to know, and they got treated so badly that they had to let go of their life. And so I think stereotype we can change. I'm tired of this othering as well. We're constantly pointing fingers and saying that person said this and that person said this. Saying, I know people are saying this, but what am I doing about it? So I think the accountability and the responsibility of change lies with each one of us by having these conversations, by saying, okay, from this webinar today, I'm going to take just one thing out of this. And for me, and I'm going to make that change because I am responsible for the society that I live in. The society doesn't create me. I create the society.
Thank you so much for sharing. And really tragic experience, and hopefully conversations like this can move positive change forward. Let's stay on the theme of practical takeaways while we've just got a moment or two left. All family makeups should be celebrated, recognized, accepted, and appreciated. Could you each give me one quick practical takeaway on how organizations can celebrate non-traditional families authentically?
I think it's timely because we're just about to go into June and we're working towards Pride Month, but I don't fall into the trap of thinking that we can only talk about queer families in June and not the rest of the year. Really think about, yes, intentional calendar celebrations, but spread the joy throughout the year. When families come up, think inclusively about all kinds of families and keep it going, not just keeping it for those 4 weeks of June.
Absolutely, queer all year.
For me, Neil, I think that, and I know in the business that I run a speaking business as well. I see this all the time. You have queer events where you have, say, for queer parenting and alternate families, and guess who are invited and who attends? It's only the queers who attend.
Yeah.
What is the point? I already know I'm queer. I already know the
Yeah.
problems. I already know the solution. Get allies join in. Make organizations should not make it just about LGBT event. Make it an event.
Yeah.
Why is it just an LGBT event? Make it an event so people can join in as families or people who want to have families in the future. We can't predict how our families are going to turn out. I'm sorry if anybody knows, I'm not that person.
Yeah.
So keep it open, keep it,
Yep.
don't box us.
And Josephine.
Yeah, I think for me, it's about recognizing that, it may not be your employee that's LGBTQ, but it may be their family. And so, this including everybody and providing opportunities for people to get together and to support them. It means such a lot to us as families, hugely, things like when with our health insurance that my husband gets through his company, that actually included up to the age of 25 help and surgery for transgender individuals. So, those sorts of things can actually speaks volumes, I think, to the people who work for you.
Thank you all so much for joining me. Thank you everyone for taking time to be part of this conversation.